Hello and welcome to Stop Eating My Popcorn, the movie review and discussion show on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm your host Glenn Blank. Welcome and thank you for joining me. Of all the possible franchises within anime and manga to be adapted by Hollywood into a live-action movie for a predominantly Western audience, Ghost in the Shell would probably be listed among the ones least likely to even be noticed and recognized as a valuable IP by movie executives, and for the idea of a Ghost in the Shell movie to be some wild pie-in-the-sky proposal that was thrown out there and placed on the brainstorming whiteboard would be strange enough on its own, let alone someone actually going out and funding it and writing it and then making it. When I first heard the news that this was indeed what was happening, that a Ghost in the Shell movie was being made and would come out soon, I had feelings more of surprise and curiosity than either optimism or pessimism. This is because Ghost in the Shell is a complex, multi-layered story which cannot be easily translated into a standalone 90-minute or 2-hour movie. As far as the main plot is concerned, this is an espionage and police thriller story. Ghost in the Shell is an intelligence and operations unit working secretly through the direct orders from ministers of government. It's a small group of highly skilled professionals who work to uncover criminal plots of theft, murder, smuggling, kidnapping and terrorism. The police work of Section 9, where evidence is collected, witnesses are interviewed, leads are followed, motivation is uncovered, and criminal activities are taken down through guns and fighting, takes up the bulk of the story. The Ghost in the Shell futuristic fantasy world, with cybernetic technology converting the organic tissue of the brain into a digital computer, never takes a central position within the storyline, but always is in the background and might provide the scaffolding for how the plot will unfold and where it might go. This makes Ghost in the Shell a very confusing anime for people when first introduced to it, because the very thing that makes it so unique, where you actually need to get your head around how this world works and functions, isn't actually as important as the Section 9 police work is. Unlike, say, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, or Fahrenheit 451, where it's through the story that we discover and explain how this world operates, in Ghost in the Shell there are plenty of questions about the rules of the world that go unanswered and unexplained. There are so many elements of cybernetic brains that simply go without any detail or explanation. So, you might ask, for a Hollywood studio trying to translate and convert Ghost in the Shell to a Western audience, how should they organize, structure, design and illustrate this world? They can't do a shot-for-shot recreation of the anime into a live action, because that would alienate and confuse the majority of the audience unfamiliar with the original franchise. Because the cybernetic world is not introduced, but simply provides the background framework for the story, it will appear all very confusing and intimidating. That would be just fan service, without even the pretenses of bringing in and providing entertainment for a wider and more diverse audience to watch the movie. Or do they bring the cybernetic sci-fi elements into the foreground, making it the clear determinant of where the plot will go and what will happen, which will in turn neglect or relegate the police work away from the center stage? Or do they push the sci-fi world further back into the background, where it barely gets mentioned and doesn't come into play with how the plot develops, at which point the show becomes a run-of-the-mill counter-terrorism elite police movie? In the end, faced with this lose-lose dilemma, the producers of this Ghost in the Shell movie decided to push both of these two objective environmental elements further back. A great deal of screen time is spent with the Major in her personal journey, while the police work of Section 9 and the fantastical features of cybernetics are both reduced and limited and kept to only being side elements. We only get to see a couple of Section 9 operations conducted throughout the movie, and both of them are so badly explained and set up and presented, with the difficulty, stakes and the balance of forces never getting provided, so it becomes difficult to understand what's actually happening, that there's no genuine satisfaction when seeing them get successfully resolved. Although I am obviously disappointed that the Ghost in the Shell universe and storyline was altered so much, that there's such a vast gulf between how this world is represented in the original anime and now in this movie, I am sympathetic to the constraints felt by the Hollywood producers, and the fact that most of these changes just had to happen regardless of willpower or desire or preferences. Another thing that Hollywood did for this movie was change some of the Ghost in the Shell lore, information about the Major's backstory, the position that Section 9 occupies within the Japanese government, and the organizational and managerial relationships that exist within Section 9 have all been altered. Most of this, again, is perfectly acceptable. There's no rule that says that adaptations have to be precisely identical to the original source material, and that creative licensing does allow for proportional reimagining or adjustments depending on the medium, resources, and audience. All of the changes to the Hollywood movie don't affect the overall substance of the plot, the world, or the main characters of Ghost in the Shell. The core substance of what they mean and what they do haven't changed, so I don't have a problem with any of them. Stylistically, in terms of the outfits worn by the characters, the architecture of the buildings, the colour and light schemes, the cinematography, the tones of voice that characters speak in, the way they move their bodies, this Ghost in the Shell movie borrows heavily from the Hollywood sci-fi fantasy action movies of the past. As you watch the movie, it will immediately trigger memories of The Matrix, Blade Runner, Minority Report, etc. Sometimes this is just borrowing a particular style, placing this movie within a particular genre, and other times it almost verges on plagiarizing them. At the end of the day, I don't mind this either. To strictly and unhesitatingly translate the Ghost in the Shell anime style and imagery into a Hollywood movie would have required lots of extra money and tons of hard work. Far more than could be justified for just one movie that will only ever have limited popular appeal. The producers and directors could not spend too much time looking at the original source material and trying to copy it. And to work at a faster speed, they needed to do things that they've done before and were more familiar with. And this required a certain amount of copying and pasting from previous movies of the same genre. Sure, I'm not pleased that this is the case, and I wished that the unique Ghost in the Shell style had been placed onto the big screen. But being realistic, I know that this was impossible. And considering the various ways that this could have gone terribly wrong and created an ugly monster of a movie, the end result is not that bad, all things considered. Most of the core elements of the Ghost in the Shell universe are here in this movie. The imagery of a society half in urban decay and half stuck on permanent adrenaline, the neon flashing lights and buzzing sounds of commercial capitalism gone amok, the underbelly of crime and political corruption, the battle between hackers on both sides in order to steal or protect valuable information, the police working to try to stop crime and catch the criminals, the internet with mountains upon mountains of information that could get collected or consumed or created. The producers have created a world that feels very Ghost in the Shell like, so the core fan base should be satisfied with what this movie has for them in terms of what is overall presented on screen. When you compare how Hollywood has translated and reimagined the Ghost in the Shell world to what they did to Dragon Ball Z, the conclusion drawn is that this is a fairly good, mostly impressive job. Sure, it has its problems, and it verges on being clumsy and nonsensical at times. It begins to abandon abandon the original anime altogether and becomes nothing more than a Matrix Blade Runner clone, but I'm not deeply upset or confused or angered about any of this. I don't have this romantic naivete about what Hollywood is capable of. I know its limitations and constraints. I know that Hollywood producers are finite and imperfect people, so the fact that they've been able to pull off a fairly convincing and good job is worth applauding. I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but the CGI in this movie was very good. There are two major alien environments in the movie which need to be established and catered to. Firstly, the consumerism-obsessed mainstream city with its flashing neon lights that advertise products and services, and secondly, the physical representation of both computers and the internet, as cybernetic humans can travel through the digital world as disembodied entities of data. Both of these worlds are meant to be over the top, mesmerizing and fantastical, places to be immersed inside of, dissimilar to our own world. And this is exactly the appropriate situation for when CGI ought to be used, as a substitute, not supplement, to human activity. And the movie is able to create impressive, reasonably strong and shaped CGI that both captures the otherness of these worlds while not being overbearing and distracting. They were able to perfectly strike the balance, making the CGI a way to immerse the viewer into these worlds. It was all very well done. The biggest and most disappointing change from the Ghost in the Shell original anime to this Hollywood movie is the personality, temperament, and role of the Major. In the anime, the Major is depicted as emotionless, cold, and almost robotic, who is ruthlessly efficient, determined, and strong-willed about her work as a special agent officer, who is endlessly confident about her abilities, and who is ready to take whatever risks are necessary in order to achieve her goals. It's only here and there, through the gaps, one scene here and one line of dialogue there, that we begin to uncover the emotionally scarred, vulnerable, confused, and struggling human being that she is. The full scope of her personality, her going on deep philosophical self-reflections in order to locate answers to questions long pondered, are only provided to the audience in drips over the course of the show. With each episode we watch, we're given a couple of extra pieces to add to the overall puzzle of the Major's personality and life story, and it becomes the job of fans to theorize about who the Major truly is, what she genuinely thinks and feels, and what her past actually was like. But the creators of this Hollywood movie have decided to flip things the other way around. For almost the entire length of the movie, the Major is shy, unsure, quiet, passive, and it's only on those few occasions when the plot calls for it that we get to see her strong, calm, determined, kicking butt and taking names. She spends so much time in this movie dwelling on her past, worrying about who she is and where she belongs, and her search for answers overshadows the police work of Section 9. She comes off as pathetic, meek, sorry, extremely vulnerable, and useless, barely able to defend herself, let alone pursue professional criminals and cyber terrorists across the city. It's only on those rare occasions when it's time for a set-piece battle that we actually get to see the Major fight in her merciless, no-frills, cutthroat, unwavering style. So the entire persona of the Major has been flipped the wrong way around. Rather than being a very thoughtful, emotionless, efficient, an extremely talented police officer 6 days of the week, leaving the other day for being emotional, contemplative, philosophical, deeply yearning for uncovering the mysteries of her life, we instead have a situation where most of the movie involves the Major's angst, and only a tiny portion of it is of her being an awesome and terrifying heroine. This is a serious problem. Hollywood has this terrible habit with depicting their leading women women as weak, scared, innocent, who cannot comprehend, let alone defeat their enemies within this man's world. Western cinema seems to have this almost pornographic obsession with representing women in very dangerous, very vulnerable states, so that we may take pity on them for how pathetic and miserable they are. This depiction of women has absolutely nothing to do with the original Major in the Ghost in the Shell manga and anime. Sure, there are a few moments here and there across the anime where she is unsure of what to do, is exposed and out of step and weak, but these don't remotely compare with how the movie treats her. Firstly, because they are very small compared with the entirety of the anime's run length. Secondly, they are deep and serious contemplations about her existence as a person, and so even when the Major is in a state of vulnerability, she's still a thinking, independent, free-willed person searching for answers. At no point does she become like Bella from Twilight, standing still and not initiating anything herself, where other people and the environment are the ones always acting upon her, telling her what to do and shaping the plot around her. Thirdly, these moments when the Major is vulnerable are a way for her to piece together her backstory and identity. Before I end this review, let me just mention the soundtrack for this movie. The background music is directly inspired by the original Ghost in the Shell anime, almost an exact replica, but just changed enough so that you know that it's a unique score. It's very well done. It feels just as eerie and unsettling as the original, and it immediately situates you into this fantastical, scary, entertaining, terrifying, futuristic world. The duality of the Ghost in the Shell world, with hyperized consumerism in the main streets, and then in the side streets you see nothing but garbage, dirty money, crime, prostitution, and other sex services, and lots of murder and violence, is cleverly captured by the score, which is very soft and high-pitched and calming, yet at the same time feels almost hypnotic in how it tries to soothe you into not noticing how disgusting, immoral, crime-ridden, and dirty this world actually is. In terms of acting performances, having real-life human beings trying to imitate a character that they've only ever, up until now, seen as a comic and cartoon, the cast of the members of Section 9, other than the Major, were outstanding. Specifically, the actors playing Bato, Togasa, and Aramaki were spot on terrific, capturing their overall personality and attitude, their mannerisms, down to their body language and speaking styles. It's just a shame that they had such little screen time, because considering the overall storyline arc of the entire movie, as well as where and when the high stakes events actually occur, they are completely forgettable and unimportant characters, which is a terrible tragedy considering how good of an acting performance they were putting on. It's very difficult to think of anything to say about the Major's acting performance, because her character has been changed so much, so radically from the original source material. The actual performance by Scarlett Johansson on screen was nothing like the Major from the actual anime and manga. But depending on what direction and script notes Johansson was given, the actress probably did a reasonably good job in depicting the type of Major that she was assigned. There was nothing outstanding or terrific or awful or pathetic about her performance, just that I didn't find it particularly inspiring or entertaining or revolting or emotional emotionally triggering in any sort of way. In conclusion, when you consider Hollywood's awful record of adapting and translating non-Western original source material into a movie for a high-end, wealthy, predominantly white Western audience, when you consider how unique Ghost in the Shell is, even within the manga and anime worlds, this is a reasonably good movie. It still sits well behind the manga, anime movies, and anime series, but it certainly isn't so horrible that the franchise and fandom would need to disown it from the canon out of some statement of principle, like what happened with Dragon Ball Z. I hope that this movie will at least entertain and inspire a small number of Western audience members so that they may become interested enough to go back and watch the original anime. If this movie is able to create a new generation of Ghost in the Shell fans, then it's been a successful movie. Having a larger, younger, more engaged, more active Ghost in the Shell fan base can only be a good thing. I just hope that the older Ghost in the Shell fans who have lived through the original anime in the 90s won't act too uptight and puritanical when reviewing this movie, interpreting every change as a sin, seeing every error as unforgivable, which would inevitably lead them to condemn this entire movie as worthless and awful. That is not a fair depiction, and I hope that this isn't the lasting impression that this movie will have on the Ghost in the Shell franchise in the years to come. And that's the end of the program. You've been listening to Stop Eating My Popcorn, the movie review and discussion show on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Glenn Blank. Until I watch and review another movie, goodbye.